Thank you all so much for attending today. This is such a pleasure. My name is Aaron Pete. I am the moderator for today, and we will be speaking about Indigenous stories, the journey all of you have been on, and the work you're doing. But I'm wondering if we could perhaps start with an intro, and we'll start with you. Are we able to talk about your First Nation community and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, Sito Z, Trevor, Mack, Tledin Koch, Denineslin, Nachwasechana Liagulin. I'm saying that in my language of Tailkotin. My name is Trevor Mack. I'm a person of the plateau by the river. So I just want to acknowledge the Stalo territory that we're on and being a visitor on this territory. It's the Fraser River that connects our people. In our language, Ko, as we say, the Sturgeon River. And so I'm sure for thousands of years that our peoples along the river were always in communication and, always talking with one another. And so it's great to be here in this territory by the river.
Brilliant. Violet, would you mind introducing yourself and connecting us with the Cowork territory?
Yo nuko am Violet Nelson. I'm from, on my mom's side, Quetzino and Kinkum Inlet, and that's on Vancouver Island. For Quetzino is near Port Hardy, and then Kinkum Inlet is a little bit further north, I think. And then on my dad's side, I'm from Honduras. The first two words I just said was, hello, my name is. And yeah.
Asia, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. Tansei, my name's Asia Youngman. I'm Cree Métis on my mother's side from Treaty 6 territory in Alberta. But I was born and grew up on Coast of the Alish territories and currently live in Vancouver on the traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nation.
Beautiful. Trevor, you have a very interesting start. YouTube videos is where you started to get interested in video creation. Would you mind taking us back to your origin story on those early days of working on Halo?
On Halo. Okay, my origin story. Fading. No, just kidding. It was with my mother used to work at our Tailkotin National Government Office, and I got to chill around the offices and look at websites and kind of start being curious on how websites, like, okay, what is this website? How does it work? So it was in combination with video game editing and website making that I started seeing the creative sides of these video games and how you can create montages. And so back in the day, this was before YouTube. So we were having to share and download manually, creating our own live streaming premieres. And so back in the day, we were always trying to one-up each other creatively as like just young guys video editing. And so there's always these little competitions happening, and then that led to collaboration with Red Bull Gaming and SteelSeries Gunner Optics at 17. They flew our video editing group out to Dallas, Texas to see these Major League Gaming expos. And for me, 17 years old, I was like, wow, you guys are millionaire video gamers. This is the coolest thing ever. And it was from there getting into coming back home and going, okay, I'm living in, Vancouver area. Who am I? Who am I representing myself here? Who am I in this space? And then how can I utilize filmmaking to learn more about myself and my culture back home? And so that led to then starting to make short films in our culture and back home.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've also done this ice skating downhill championship competition. So there's almost this inherent risk taking that you're willing to take that others might shy away from. Is that something that you've tried to hone and work towards?
I don't know about work towards. I've learned to hone it back as I've been getting more gray hairs and getting more mature. My knees are clicking. I've been like, okay, I'm not that young man anymore. But still, yeah, utilizing that attitude of this unprecedented and risk taking and sometimes acting as the voice for people who are telling me a lot of times back home, it's elders saying, hey, we should be doing this. And then so seeing now myself utilizing that energy into, speaking for those who can't speak, or creating something for, people who are asking me to. And so, yeah, with the Red Bull Crash Ice, that was big in my identity journey too, because I'm competing at the World Championships, going, yeah, Canada, right? Then I'm like, wait a second, I'm not Canadian. Like, I grew up not feeling Canadian. CIFF23. What does that mean? Why am I representing Canada, holding the flag here? And then so that was happening at the same time as the video game stuff. And so, yeah, it was all leading to integrating that risk-taking into a focused way for cultural revitalization and inspiration for the next generations.
Fascinating. Asia, you've been a part of working with accelerator programs that help and support filmmakers create and produce and work to hone their skills. Do you find that that's an important resource that's available? Should there be more of that? Does that help open doors?
I think so. I think particularly for like the networking opportunities and some of the initiatives that I took part in, it was really helpful, because not only do you learn from, experts and established filmmakers in the industry, but I think it's also, you're getting opportunities to go on set. So for one of the programs I did with the Canadian Academy Directors Program for Women, part of that initiative was that they took all the directors and put them on some sort of show so they could shadow on set. And so that was really exciting for me, because at that point I had never really been on a set of that size. And I think just kind of understanding, the pace of what it's like being on set and what's expected of me as a director on, say, like an episodic show, things like that was really helpful. So I think anytime that, someone can take part in some sort of mentorship or, initiative to really kind of help them meet new people and that sort of thing is always beneficial.
Do you think there should be more of that, or is there anything about the program, looking back, if you were to implement it today, that you would do differently to support Indigenous voices?
I would love to see more of it, but I think right now what I'm finding at my stage in my career is that I'm looking for opportunities, and I think it's great to offer shadowing and mentorship, but ultimately we need more opportunities to actually prove ourselves and just be given a shot to like go direct an episode of television, right? And so I think that's really kind of the biggest barrier that I'm seeing right now. It's great that, people can learn, but up to a certain point, you just kind of have to dive in and learn by doing it.
Right. I'm wondering how else you guys think we can support Indigenous creators. One of the challenges that I see is distance to the metropolises of Vancouver or Toronto. That's going to be one of the larger barriers. And for Indigenous people within this region, one of the challenges is going off from here to Vancouver, which is only to some a 2-hour drive, but you're disconnected from your community, from your family members, from your loved ones. You face this. Your community, Kwakwaka'wakw, is very far away from Vancouver or Toronto in the film festival going on. How do we make sure that we start to fill that gap from your perspective?
Oh, shoot, you're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were asking all of us with other communities. Oh, damn. Can you repeat that?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the challenges I see is going from a remote community all the way to a Vancouver or a Toronto. The pace is so different. The cultures can be so different. And so trying to make sure that we support people in that kind of transition to city life and make sure that they still feel supported. The one experience that I saw is a nurse who wanted to go to UBC. She had huge mental health problems because she didn't know anybody. She didn't have any supports. And the culture was to drink every night. And so she got into that culture and she ended up dropping out and going back to her community, and she didn't think she could hack it, but not because she didn't have the intelligence to do the program, but because the culture was so different. And I'm just wondering how we support Indigenous creators who might be coming from remote communities in making it in the city.
Well, actually, I grew up in the city, so I'm not that connected to my community. I rarely get to go back because it's such a long trip. But I feel like my experiences being on set, I've had pretty good experiences where, for the Body Remembers, the directors and producers, they got an elder from my community, and I found out that her and I were related. On set, she had them on set for once a week, and then she kind of was just there for everybody because there was that mentorship program as well for Indigenous people, and she was kind of there for everybody. So I feel like having that connection and support from directors and producers and just anybody on set is really good. especially having elders on set is really good, especially if it's like a film or project that's like very into, I guess, traumatizing experiences.
Right.
Yeah.
Trevor, do you have anything to add to this conversation?
Yeah, because this is what happened to me. I left my small community and I got into that as well. I got into the drinking because I was a young man away from home, away from the land that I grew up in. And then that culminated until 2016, where I was assaulted and mugged downtown Vancouver. And I had my jaw wired shut for about 3 months. And then so that's where this iteration of Portraits from a Fire, our film that we shot in our community, kind of came from an experience like that of getting very lost in the cities. And then with that wisdom coming back home and being able to say, oh, okay, like this is where my identity is from. Tsaishkotin, people of the Glacial Rock River, Tledinko, the plateau by the river. And so I think looking at, the future of how we can support artists or filmmakers out in remote communities is keep these people in their communities, because they are shooting for something. They have aspirations. They're inspiring. They're the role models. They're most likely probably outspoken young people of their communities. And so they have ideas. And so when you remove that person from their community, there's this hole now that's in their communities. And then, hopefully they can come back. But, what are the ways in which we can fully support that person within their community and support them on what they need economically, spiritually, and anything that can help nourish what is blossoming in that community.
You mentioned role models, and this is a challenge I see within my community specifically, which is that their neighbors aren't necessarily doctors, lawyers, judges, people in those types of work. So it's hard to aspire to be like those people. And I'm wondering, for all of you, who are your role models? Asia, can we start with you? Who were some of the people you looked up to in film that inspired you?
Well, when I was younger, I didn't really know that this was a career path for myself, because I don't think I really saw a lot of Indigenous people, especially Indigenous women, working as directors, as writers, things like that. So it took me quite a long time, I think, to discover filmmaking. I went to university and studied like psychology and sociology, and I was trying all sorts of things and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But I was always naturally inclined to the arts. But I think it was until after I graduated university, moved back to the mainland, was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I actually met Trevor at one of like the first jobs that I had after university. And I saw what Trevor was doing, and I was like, that's so cool. Like, I would love to be doing that one day. So I think Trevor is actually someone who I really looked up to when I first was getting started in film. He was making his short films and he was traveling with them and just getting to share them with audiences and just create stories that he was really passionate about. So I think really early on, like Trevor was someone where I was like really admired and just wanted to kind of follow in his footsteps. So it was cool that we, became friends by working together at this like Indigenous health through Provincial Health Services Authority. So we were working on an upstream suicide prevention program for Indigenous youth, and we did a lot of online content. So Trevor was hired on to make like these videos for youth, and I kind of got into that as well and was teaching myself through like trial and error, like how to film, how to edit, that sort of thing. But I think now it's a really exciting time because there's so many more, I think, Indigenous people in the film industry and in television as well. And there's so many people that I really admire what they're doing. Like Tracy Deer is someone that I'm a huge fan of. And, she's kind of mentored me in some aspects, and just seeing what she's doing through like her own film work and television work, I think is really inspiring.
I always have to ask the follow-up. Trevor, what does it mean to hear that you actually inspired others to go down this path? Well,
it's awesome. And then I get to learn from Asia. We've collaborated on a couple of short films together. And so that was amazing, where it's always knowing that we can learn from everybody is something that is like, well, you're not higher than anybody else. It's like, trying to elevate each other up. And so, that's cool. I remember when we were first working together, and now it's cool that, we can be on a panel like this together now.
Violet, who were some of the people that you looked up to when entering the industry?
Well, there wasn't too many because I just didn't really see anybody on screen. But I think, like right now, I look to Elamaya Tailfeathers, just because she's acting, writing, directing, and I'm like, damn, you do it all, girl. But I look to her because like she's so strong, and so like I want to be where she's at someday. And so when we were doing like press for like Night Raiders, her and I'd be talking, and I'm like, how did you get here? And she's like, it took a lot of work and it was really hard, but I feel like it might be a bit more easier for you because slowly the industry is accepting more Indigenous people and Indigenous women into this industry. And I feel like it might be a little bit more easier for you. And I was like, okay, cool. And then another person is Devery Jacobs. I like really look up to her. I remember when I first got a message from her and I like freaked out. I was on the SkyTrain and I was like, holy shit. I was like, she messaged me. I was like, oh god damn. And I was like, fuck. And I like called my mom and I was like, she followed me. She messaged me. But I like look up to her a lot as well. Just cause like she's, I don't know, she like speaks up a lot, and I like people that speak up a lot. Yeah.
Trevor, who were some of those early inspirations?
I think for me, it was because I got to spend a lot of time at our national government office. I got to see up in the meeting room all the chiefs and leaders. I didn't know exactly what they were doing, but I was like, wow, they got all these maps on the big table, and there's some important meetings going up there. Like, they must be doing something important, and everybody's working together. Like, there's like 20 people in that room. And just growing up at our whether it be community meetings and just seeing and being part of how our community deals with problems, I think it was there where I was getting my first look at, oh, okay, these are the dynamics here, and wow, this person is, whether they're receiving harsh words because of what they did as a leader, or they've done something good for the community. And I think that my grandmother was, I think for me, my hero growing up. 13 kids, raising me with my single mom who was working, so I was living on the res with my grandparents, and then going into movies and just kind of being captivated by these holograms of these directors, whether it be like Alfonso Cuarón or even James Cameron, like Avatar. Even I remember I was like in high school and just like, wow, what an amazing experience. So yeah, and then now for me is the youth that inspire me. Whether it be the youth that worked on Portraits from a Fire, we're waking up at like, we had some like 3 a.m. days, 4 a.m. days, and then the kids are all there like ready to go. And then now I've been grateful to be traveling to Indigenous communities in Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, Peru, and seeing the filmmaking and artistry coming out of those communities down there who have next to no financial support, the consciousness around Indigenous rights is far lower than it is in Canada, and yet they're doing it, and they're creating some amazing cinema out of like with no money, but just pure heart and inspiration and just wanting to express themselves. And so specifically lately, it's been the youth in communities that I've been adopted into down south.
Would you mind walking us through the film and pieces that you think are unique to your culture or to your territory that stand out for you?
In Portraits from a Fire?
Yes.
Well, that was a film that was like made for our people. It was, we had a whole script that we got funding for, and then I had some experiences that shifted my perspective, experiences on namely LSD and mushrooms. And so I took these and I went, whoa, this isn't the film. This isn't this is coming from a different place. It's not coming from the truth. It's coming from a place of projection and just releasing, but it wasn't coming from a place of the wisdom of I think of Indigenous intergenerational cinema. You know, is this a movie that, you know, the grandparents, the elders can understand? Is it a movie that the adults can find engaging, that the teenagers can think is cool, that the kids can, you know, have fun at? And so the previous iteration, it wasn't any of that, because it was okay, it would be this dramatic film that will play at all the film festivals and win awards and all that, but then is that a film that can inspire and give hope to the youth to want to live like the next day? We have suicide epidemics in our communities. Is this a film that's going to add to the suicide epidemic, or is this a film that's going to make kids come together, laugh, and be joyous? And so this new iteration of Portraits from a Fire that we wrote with my good friend Manny Mahal, and we collaborated with Marie Clements like 2 months before we shot the film. And so it's fully a film that's for our people, specifically to bring our people together and be proud of what we've gone through, not identify with our traumas, but be proud of who we are and the strength that it's taken to be alive as Indigenous people today. And so, I mean, there's so many little things, so many little inside jokes that are in there, and that I think I'd love to continue to create.
Violet, developing a character, from my understanding, is very challenging because you have to make certain decisions on what's going to be focused on. What was that process, and what do you hope people take away from the character?
Which character?
The one that we're supposed to be discussing.
Okay. For Rosie, it was kind of difficult because, like, I have, like, connections to her story because my mom went through similar things that Rosie went through. And I also went through, like, the foster care system. And so it was a little challenging to do that and to, like, go back to those places. Don't know how to word this. I, like, one time during rehearsals, I kind of just broke down because, like, I, like, read this one scene and Rosie was talking about a situation that she was in with her partner, and I, like, broke down. And so Maya and Kathleen, they were both like, okay, we're going to stop. We're going to come back to this tomorrow if you want to. We're giving you a choice. You can walk away from this role if it's too much, or you can continue if you feel comfortable. And if you do, then we'll find the resources for ourselves to support you better. Because they told me, they're like, we didn't realize that we would be bringing up past traumas for someone who's gone through similar things as Rosie. And so kind of just having that support system really worked. So I feel like it was kind of easy to, like, get into that mindset, but it was hard to stay there. Yeah.
What does it mean to you to have been given that support? In other circumstances, maybe somebody doesn't take that pause, maybe they're not as sympathetic, maybe they don't try and come up with the resources. And it seems like that's something that's going to be necessary, particularly when we're talking about these very heavy issues. Could you rephrase that? Yeah. How do we make sure that we encourage this type of support for creators and Indigenous creators who are undoubtedly going to have that trauma and faced similar experiences?
I feel like having more of an open mind about these situations and trying to, I guess, like, put yourself in their shoes, but not really. Ask them what kind of support they need. Because not everyone's going to need the same support as, like, myself that I got. Some people could probably just push through it. Don't suggest that, but they can just push through it. But I couldn't push through that, and just, like, for people to, like, find that support for their actors and actresses. Just so you're not, like, re-traumatizing them through those situations. Because I feel like if they didn't do that, I'd probably go back to like not being healed from that situation.
What did you learn from playing the role of Rosie?
I learned that a lot of people that not even like when we went to one film festival, it was like out of the country. I found that there's a lot of people from different countries that are going through similar things that she's gone through. I've had people come up to me and they're like, I wanted to let you know, like, I went through something similar, and then they would just break down, and I was like, oh shit, like, this is like something that a lot of people have gone through and still going through. And I feel like Rosie and like this film really helps others know that they're not alone, and that if they really needed to, they could find those resources to get the help. But it's not going to be easy, because it's not easy just to leave a relationship like that. Yeah.
Asia, where did the idea for your film come from?
Which one?
I can't say it, yes.
Oh, the one that's at the festival, or the one?
The one that starts with an N.
Oh,
Next
Naha
set.
Idku?
Yeah.
I mean, it was inspired by just some of my early experiences when I was growing up. Like for myself, I grew up very disconnected from my Indigenous identity. My mom went through foster care. My dad was adopted by a non-Indigenous family. We still don't really know where he's from to this day. So it was hard for me growing up. Like, I grew up in the suburb. There weren't really any other Indigenous people at my school. I felt very like isolated and alone, and experienced some racist bullying. So I didn't really want to associate with being Indigenous at that age. And I think so partly I wanted to, integrate that into the main character, Zaraya's experience of just trying to fit in, and also dealing with like peer pressure and bullying and things like that. But also it was kind of drawn from, some of my early memories of going to the Okanagan every summer and like swimming in the lake, and we'd visit some family friends, and they had a daughter who was around my age. And so we'd go swimming in the lake and like scare each other with stories of like the Ogopogo. So it was partly that, but I think, I'd seen a lot of films that sort of portrayed kind of like a lake monster or like a lake spirit, but they often don't really do it from like an authentic point of view. And so I really wanted to do a story that was a bit more authentic to what, the lake spirit means to the people in the Okanagan. And essentially it's called Naha Idku. So it's not really like a lake monster. It's more of like a spirit and a protector. And so, of course, like, because I'm Cree Métis, like, that's not my story to tell necessarily. So before I even, was seeking funding for the film, like, I reached out to the community and was asking, permission to tell the story, and really worked closely with them to kind of, create what the Naha Idku, would look like kind of through their stories that they were told when they were growing up. And so part of it's just, my own kind of coming of age. I want to do something that was a bit nostalgic. And for me, kind of moving from documentary into more of like a narrative space, like it was my second short narrative film that I had done. So I wanted to kind of try a lot of things that I hadn't done in the past and really challenge myself to do things that were out of my comfort zone. So yeah, a lot of just like inspiration from, growing up, and just kind of wanting to also do a more like authentic portrayal of the Naha Idku as well.
Right. There's a sense of responsibility it feels like you had towards telling this story properly. Is there resources to make sure that if people want to share these stories, that they do it in a culturally sensitive, culturally considerate way?
I mean, I think in terms of resources, it's definitely like reaching out to the community, talking about like protocols and making sure that you're doing something in a good way. So that was always the most important thing for me, was like to make sure that the community felt proud of the story that was, being portrayed and that was being created. So like I was always sharing like the script, making sure that it was something that they were happy with. And when we actually were kind of coming up with what the Naha Idku looks like, went back and forth, with our concept artist to, one of the community members we were working with, and just making sure that it looked how she imagined. And essentially, the stories that she was told by her grandmother was that the Naha Idku, like if it was in sort of a physical form, it had the body of like a sturgeon, and it had like a horse head and antlers. And so I think it's very different from like what people would think of like what the Ogopogo looks like, because you see it like, as this like cartoon kind of like snake, a green snake. Yeah. Like if you go to the Kelowna, it's everywhere, right? Yeah. So it's sort of become this very like commercialized depiction, I think, for what the Naha'iku is supposed to look like and represent. So I really wanted to just kind of, do something to honor kind of what it truly means to the people there.
What advice do you have for new creators who are entering the space? Is there a mistake you made or an area you would have approached differently throughout your career so far that you think others should know about?
Like in general, like anything?
Yeah.
Or specifically this project?
No, generally.
Oh, get a lawyer. Get a lawyer to look at your contracts.
Right.
That's a big one.
Right.
Yeah, I think just like, I feel like as artists, sometimes we just like, we come into things and we have this vision of what we want to do, and we just want to focus on like the art of it all. And I wish it was that way, but what I've kind of learned is it's also important to have a business mindset and just make sure that you're protected, as an artist, and make sure that the contracts that you're signing, that you're kind of protected. So I think that's the big thing that I learned was, trying to get representation or seeking an entertainment lawyer to look over the contracts that I was signing.
Fascinating.
There's a lawyer in the audience.
Violet, what advice would you have for new creators looking to enter the space?
This is what my mom always she told me this before I started going into the film industry. I actually didn't want to. I didn't think it was an interest of mine. And she's like, you should audition. And I was like, no, it's not my thing. And she's like, how do you know it's not your thing? And I was like, well, damn. Okay, you got me there. And I was like, oh, I guess so. And she's like, it's either you get a yes or a no. Either way, if you're still interested, you can still go for something else after. And to just, you're going to get a lot of no's for auditioning, is what I've always been told by other actors. And you kind of just have to get a bit of tough skin, and after you're done auditioning, just forget about it after, is what I do. And then sometimes my friends will be like, did you get the role for that part? And I'm like, what part? And they're like, the part, you said you were auditioning. And I was like, oh shit, no, I don't know. I was like, I forgot about it.
Yeah.
I was like, you kind of have to forget about it afterwards, because if you keep thinking about it, you're just gonna bring your own mental state down, because you're like, okay, I guess I wasn't good enough. But you just kind of gotta forget about the audition after, just so that you don't bring yourself down.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel just do it if you really feel like it. And if you don't think it's your thing, you're never gonna know unless you try.
That's very good advice.
I'm a mom.
Trevor, what advice do you have for new creators?
Well, new creators, I don't know. There's so many ways of creating now. You got what VR, augmented reality, all these technologies happening. But I think with any artistic modality, it's the willingness to see mistakes as teachings in progress. To start. There's so many people who think that they can't draw. They'll make a little horse and they go, I'm so bad at drawing. But then that's the first one. You're going to keep getting better and keep getting better. It's the same with filmmaking. At first, maybe it's not going to be as you envisioned it, but you got to create it. And then so you can learn from that process. And then another one I'd say is to find a mentor. Find somebody that you can continually ask questions to and have a relationship as a teacher or student. For young people, especially Indigenous people, that's we're still youth, we're still traditionally in the age of learning from the elders and them telling us what to do, and we go do it. That's what for thousands of years, that's what we'd be doing in our age group. And so how can we implement those traditional values into our processes of artistic creation? And with that comes a lot of humility. With that comes a lot of ways in which that kind of butt heads with the film industry, especially when you start getting attention and everybody's like, wow, you're so amazing, look at you. And you're going, yeah, look at me, yeah, look at me. But then that can kind of spiral out of control, like that happened with me. And so now I've been able to integrate our traditional values, our traditional structures within the artistic process, and seeing that, okay, does this film represent my people in a good way? Does this film represent our Dechentelistan natural law, traditional law values? Does this film help our people get out onto the land more, so then that they can find healing on the land? So for me, with that integration of our traditional values has come a whole different way of making film, but then also what films I'm creating, who I'm collaborating with. And then it creates a longer and longer vision where instead of just like, oh, okay, this is just a film that we're making, now with this kind of longer mindset is kind of saying, okay, this film is going to connect to this because we want to do this, and then this is going to connect to this with this youth group going to go here, and then this is going to connect to that, blah, 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 blah. And so starting to get into that, you know, back into the 7 generational thinking that our ancestors had, where they could say, okay, if we do this in 7 generations from now, it's going to lead to this. So how can we then integrate that within our artistry, whatever it is, a sculpture or a film? But especially with film and cinema is important because we're stewarding people coming together. You know, we can have a film with like 50, 60 people on set. And then in the film too, the performances, even if it's real, even if it's just a performance, that energy is still happening in real life, whether it be somebody punching somebody, whether it be somebody sexually assaulting somebody. Okay, we're just playing pretend, but we're still putting that energy out into the world. And so for me in the filmmaking that I'm stepping into and really pushing for Indigenous cinema is, okay, how can the films help us reconnect to our ancestral constellations in order us to heal our past and then create futures of abundance and prosperity and, you know, our people being happy and joyous. But along the way, we're going to make mistakes. But once we have that mentorship and wisdom that's integrated within our filmmaking, then the way becomes a lot easier and clearer.
I've interviewed Lorne Cardinal, who played Davis on Corner Gas, and he talked about this challenge that he has where he's proud to represent his Cree community. That's something that he's loved to do, and he loved doing that on that show. But one of the challenges he's faced throughout his career is being typecast as the Indigenous person. The doors felt closed on him because he needed to fill that role. How do we find this balance from your perspective, Trevor?
How do we find the balance? I think it's just creating what our community needs. So it's going to our community saying, hey, what do we need in the community? Okay, maybe we can tell this story of our puberty initiations. Maybe we can tell the story of these teachings or this creation story. So it's less about us looking through the window, knocking at the window, hey, let me in. It's more like, wait a second, my community's back there. Okay. I'm going to go back and have my own journey back into, whether it be my own community or a community that we can be adopted into. And so that for myself, coming back and really focusing on living in community and saying, what's needed here? What can happen here? And it's just a whole different perspective. Instead of looking through the glass and say, hey, we want to be part of what you guys are doing. It's like, no. We have our communities back home. Let's elevate the youth. We have the suicide epidemics. We have drug and alcohol that our youth are dying by the numbers every single month. So instead of it's like, hey, looking at it through that way, okay, our youth are dying every single month. Okay, how can cinema help with that problem? So totally changing our perspective on the tool that cinema is. Totally changing it. I think that's what Indigenous cinema is.
Right. Asia, how do we address this challenge? I've spoken to Chattis Leo. He hosts our Native Land podcast, and he's talked to me about this challenge of only interviewing Indigenous people. He's interested in talking to all types of people, including Indigenous people, but it does seem like there needs to be this fairness where we open the doors, but their story can be on a variety of topics. It shouldn't just be focused on, oh, you're the Indigenous person, so grab out the feathers, do this, check these boxes, and that's your story. People are dynamic, and they have lots of lived experiences. How do we make sure that we open the doors, but we don't just lock them into one role?
Yeah, it's tricky. I'm kind of going through that right now. Like I'm writing a feature film. It's a very personal story about a trip I went on with my father. And what I found right now is that, you know, in the story, it's an Indigenous woman going on a trip with her father, who's also Indigenous. And I sent it out to some people just to, you know, get some early notes on it. And they're like, we don't understand why they have to be Indigenous. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with the story. And I was like, when would we ever question that? If it was, let's say it's a Caucasian character, like we would never be like, but why do they have to be, you know what I mean? Like we would never ask that question before. So it's frustrating to me why I can't just write a story with Indigenous characters and not necessarily make it about them being Indigenous. So it's interesting how a lot of funders, especially, like it seems like they're looking for like very particular stories, whereas the ones that I'm trying to do are like just, you know, more representation and just normalizing having an Indigenous person play a character. And it doesn't have to be about necessarily like their trauma, their hardships, or, you know, the types of, I think, roles that we see so often. And it's not to say that those aren't, you know, important lived experiences. They are, absolutely. But I would love to see just more variety, I think, of what, you know, for Indigenous characters and Indigenous actors, and just let them be people and let them be joyous, like Trevor is saying, and let them be happy and in love and just enjoying life or navigating careers or, you know, those sorts of things. So right now it's like, I'm really trying to push it, but it's hard when you're just constantly being like questioned or being told like, no, this isn't quite what we're looking for. So I think ultimately we just need more Indigenous people, I think, in decision-making positions.
That's one of my questions. Like when I was thinking of this question and thinking about what Lauren said, it felt controversial. It felt like something that I'm not supposed to ask. And if it's something uncomfortable for me as an Indigenous person to ask, I can't imagine the challenges that actual creators who are out there doing it. And so I fear that it's almost like a taboo topic. Am I crazy?
I mean, I would love to have a more open discussion about it. I think it's important. I think that's the only way we're going to have change. And certainly what I'm trying to do is like push those boundaries and kind of do something different. And certainly, you know, there are more hurdles, I think, to overcome, but I think it'll be worth it when it does happen, right? So I'm not going to kind of back down because I'm being told no. Like, I'm just going to kind of keep on doing it.
Perfect. That's good to hear. Violet, you did an amazing job acting in this movie. You did a great work, and all of the reviews I saw were off the charts. But it's not just because you're Indigenous, it's because you're a good actor. How do we make sure that we find this balance?
Find this balance of what?
Of making sure that we highlight Indigenous voices, but that we don't just typecast them in one role.
You know, honestly, it's hard to like, I'm gonna go a little off topic, but it's kind of hard to get like roles because there's not a whole lot that are for Indigenous people, and some of the roles that I like am interested in, it's not for like Indigenous people. It's like, oh, it's for like a Caucasian person, or it's for a Black person, or a Latina, and sometimes I can't audition for those ones because it's not Indigenous and I'm visibly Indigenous. And so it's kind of hard to just get a role. And I'm always sent like for Indigenous woman or Indigenous person. And a lot of the roles that I get sent, like for Night Raiders, it was originally for a 60-year-old Indigenous woman. And I was like, yeah, I can play a 60-year-old. Hold on. Let me get a little wiser here. But they changed it to a 19-year-old for me, and they changed it to Kwak instead of Cree, because that's what it was originally written for. But yeah, I kind of went off topic.
No, that was a good answer. I agree with it. How do we continue to support the work that you're doing? Trevor, how do we make sure that we continue to encourage the work you're doing and continue to open those doors?
Wow. Well, if you meet any rich philanthropists or like just send money my way. No, I think, just being able to help out within whether it's the grant process, whether it is just elevating voices like we are doing now, it's something that's really cool. I think it's being able to help out, whether it be film, the creative process, like writing, directing, or acting, but continuing to keep relationships going, not just seeing something as a business relationship, as like, okay, it's a contract handshake, but as a human relationship, going back to our traditional ways, is our word was considered very important as Indigenous people. Say, yeah, I'm going to do this. Yeah, we are in relation now with our families or with our peoples. You're up here as a singular person, but you're representing your community up here. You're representing whether it be your nation. Same with all of us up here. And so with that in mind is how can we look at every single project we're doing as something that's bigger, going back to the 7-generational perspective of, okay, if we're trying to help this person out, okay, it's going to lead to that. It's going to then lead to that. It's going to then lead to that. And yeah, I think we are, as Indigenous people in Canada, one of the most privileged Indigenous people in the world, with funding opportunities, with the amount of access to clean water and wild food that we have. Here we have the salmon run. Our territory, we had 1 million salmon come last year. I've come from places where Guatemala, Peru, Mexico, we can't drink clean water. There's no funding. So how can we then help share the opportunity, the abundance that we have here, just as the potlatch ceremonies, right? It's sharing the abundance of wealth. How can we do that with our Indigenous projects, with our relations down south? And so that's something, just send money our way.
One of the things, I'm on a grant selection committee, and I don't know if this is the case, but they actually allow oral requests for grants where you're able to just record a video of you explaining what you're going to do, and it's almost just like an interview about your grant process. Is the grant system working? Is it effective? Is it fair? Or is it challenging and you're trying to fit yourself into the system? And this question is for anybody.
Well, that's amazing because, our people are oral people.
Yeah.
We're storytellers, we're oral people. And I think it's been hard for Indigenous people because it's all these compartmentalized questions and you got to write it in all these ways, use those vocabularies. Yeah, that's amazing. I think more of those oral applications, that's great.
And you can start to hear the enthusiasm come through. You were talking about some of the challenges of fitting into other people's boxes. Do you feel like the grant system right now is working the way it should, or is there changes that could be made to make it more accessible?
Yes and no. I mean, I think looking at certain funding opportunities, we're so fortunate, I think, to have a lot of the funding opportunities that we do in Canada. But I find there's almost this cap of how much money you can get for a project. And so I think sometimes it's a bit frustrating because, you'll see people make a film, but maybe not do it the way that they would like to do it because they don't have as much money as they need to make it, maybe a certain production value that they're looking for. So I would love to see more money go towards projects. I think it'll really kind of help elevate a lot of projects, especially in the Canadian landscape, and just really kind of get these films kind of seen by more people around the world. So that's one thing for sure. And also too, it's hard because I find, with certain applications, I have my own production company, and so I'll apply sometimes with my own company, but because there's not a lot of Indigenous producers currently, it's a bit hard because we're constantly, trying to apply for funding for certain things, but we either have to find partners, and maybe they're not partners that we would ideally want to be working with, or they're not Indigenous, and so that can be a little bit challenging at times as well. And I think for myself applying, I maybe don't have enough credits as a producer to be applying for certain things. So it also seems like we have to kind of find ways around things, which is, I guess, the whole part of navigating kind of the grant system. And at the same time, though, I feel very fortunate to have gotten funding for the projects that I've created. But I think it would be great to kind of see, more higher budgets go towards, for some of the filmmaker projects.
All right. So we are going to take a few questions from the audience. If you could raise your hand if you have a question for any of these three, Tim will come over with the microphone. But my final question for all three of you is there's films premiering. Would you be able to tell the audience what they should be watching out for in each of your films?
Sure. So I have a film called I'm Just Here for the Riot that I co-directed. It's an ESPN 30 for 30, and it's about the 2011 Stanley Cup hockey riots, but really kind of looking at the social media witch hunt that ensued after the 2011 riot, and just kind of exploring public shaming and that sort of thing. So it's playing tonight at 6 o'clock if anyone can make it.
Perfect. Violet,
I don't think I have anything playing here.
do you have anything you'd like? How do they follow you on social media? How do they keep up with your journey?
Don't really post much either. I'm not that good at posting anything, but I'm on Instagram if you want to follow. Whenever I do post, it's like once in a blue moon.
Trevor.
I'd say check out Portraits from a Fire. It's the film that we made in our Clyde and Coke community. Yeah, check out that film. There's, I guess, some ideas looking at future projects that I have written down on trevormack.ca. So whether it be combined with just my experiences traveling down Central South America and with communities down there, I think there's going to be I think the future of Indigenous cinema is coming out of the Amazon jungle and Peru, Ecuador. And so I've been grateful to be part of these rising communities and youth. And so, yeah, I've got a website where I've got some of my travels on there you can check out. Yeah.
Perfect. Can we give a round of applause for these three? Does anybody have any questions that they would ask that I didn't ask?
Hello. So my name is Kelly William. I've worked with Trevor before, and I just met Asia recently. And so my question is, I have 8 films that I'll be writing, and once I get them all, like the script finished, what are some suggestions for the first few steps of getting the ball rolling with my films?
Finish the draft?
Just to get it in production.
Get it in production. Yeah, I'd just be sending it to people who you've met as writers, people you trust to read it, and then also just look at, I think whether it be bringing it to people, just cold visits too. Like I just went to do River Road Films in Vancouver, who made Island of the Seawolves. I just walking by and I saw their sign on their office. Oh yeah, cool. So I just walked in. I was like, hey, I want a meeting with you guys. And we just sat down on the table and just started talking. So I think it's like those cold calls too. Just have the script and then just start walking into places and just be like, hey, let's sit down. Are you free? You got like 5 minutes? Just like stuff like that. But then also sending it, I think, to writers who send them to me too. I'll check them out. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Asia?
I would look at maybe other short films that you really admire and see who the producer was on that project, and maybe reach out to them and see if that's something they might be interested in. Like Trevor said, you could share the script if you want some feedback from other writers or other filmmakers. You can reach out to the producers and be like, hey, I have these scripts if you're interested in any of them. I also think Tell a Story Hive just opened a new fund for short narratives, which is really exciting because they haven't done that in a long time. And I want to say it's $20,000. Don't quote me on that. I think it's $20,000 for a short film. Someone's nodding, so I think that's great. So they just sent out an email notifying people of that. I can actually forward it to you if you want to take a look at it. But I think, Story Hive is amazing for emerging talent because, you don't have to have, made a short film in the past. You can just come in with an idea, and they're really supportive, and the team there is amazing. I still continue to work with Tell Us to this day. So there's a lot of great, funding opportunities, I think, for us here. Like Creative BC is amazing. Definitely do the Story Hive one. And there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for your short film. So just kind of sharing it with people and trying to find some partners at this stage, I think would be a good plan.
Thank you.
Perfect. Any other questions?
Hi. I just have a quick question. I just was wondering, what are some, I think, fundamental changes that you believe should happen in the film industry to help elevate Indigenous voices? Maybe something you haven't touched on, whether it's at the corporate level the independent level, just stuff that you believe should be, a fundamental change, because obviously it shouldn't be up to Indigenous communities to prove that they should have a space or a voice in the film industry. You know, what would the future of the film industry look like to you in terms of those fundamental changes that need to happen? Is anything you haven't talked about already, or, you know?
I'd say I wanna call it ISO, Indigenous Screen Office, and to just disregard these made-up borders, Canada, United States. Oh, it's got to be just in Canada. With Indigenous peoples through 10,000 years, we've been trading and moving all up and down North, Central, South America. We have thousands of years of that relationships, and I think seeing that within our National Indigenous Screen Office and being able to support, if the relationships are made and in a good way that follows protocols, I think we shouldn't be bound to these made-up borders. Oh, it's just the Canadian film industry as Indigenous peoples. It's like, no, we got a higher consciousness in that than these made-up borders. So I think for the Indigenous Screen Office specifically, if I'm calling them out to change their policies and not abide by, I know they get the money from the federal government, but if they were risk-taking, unprecedented, then they would say, no, we want to support all Indigenous filmmakers all up and down North, Central, South America.
Please give it up one more time for these three creatives.